All right, hi everybody. Welcome to the SIGGRAPH ACM TAMU podcast. I'm John Donaldson. I'm the Industry Relations Officer, and today we're speaking to Greg Lyons and Bryan Engram at Brazen Animation in Dallas. So we'll start with Bryan. Can you give me just a little bit of information about yourself and how you got into the industry?
Yes, I am a co-founder and CEO of Brazen Animation, and started my career. I have to go back just a little bit. My mom was a theater teacher, and so I grew up around theater and acting, and of course I would do drawing as well growing up. Got into school, could not figure out what I wanted to be or do. Actually ended up going to 7 different colleges with 7 majors in 7 years, and so that was really. As you might imagine, my family is very frustrated with me about switching schools and majors constantly. I actually was at A&M for a year when I had decided I wanted to do animation, and but at that point in time, the Viz Lab was graduate school and not undergrad. Eventually ended up at UTA, University of Texas Arlington. Got a degree in art with emphasis in film, and so I was doing a lot of live action film in school. And then on the side, I was trying to teach myself animation. So graduated and got married the same week. I do not recommend that at all. It was a crazy week. And spent the next year really trying to learn animation. I got books and tutorials. And as you would imagine, there wasn't a lot of stuff, self-learning things you could do at that time. Built enough of a portfolio to eventually get hired on by Real Effects Creative Studios, also in Dallas. And they were very small at that time. They were 15 or 20 people, and brought me on as an intern. And then within 3 months, got hired on as a junior layout artist. And then I was a junior animator. And then, of course, began to grow from there. So I was an animator, then a senior animator, then a supervisor, then animation director, then eventually director of studio animation. And we went from 15, 20 people to over 500 people in a very short amount of time. And it was really wonderful, in terms of getting to grow with the company. That was a phenomenal part of that experience. Got exposed to a lot of the company and how the company runs. And, looking back at that period of my life and seeing sort of the blessings of learning how to run a company, because eventually I was running roughly half the company, reported to the co-CEO, and that helped me in my journey toward now what I'm doing, which is running Brazen. And so, the purpose of Brazen is to, of course, tell stories of meaning and purpose. And so leaving Real Effects, a good job to start a startup, can be a difficult thing, but it's been very rewarding.
Great. All right. So can we talk about you then?
Yeah, I'm Greg Lyons, the executive producer at Brazen Animation. My story starts back at TCU. I went to film school there and was mainly focused on live action filmmaking at that point. Didn't even really know animation was a thing. I knew it was a thing, obviously didn't know it was a career choice because TCU didn't have any sort of animation program. So graduated, and me and 5 buddies loaded up the U-Haul, moved out to LA with no jobs, no place to live, kind of the classic story, and eventually found my way onto a couple of movie lots and found a really steady stream of work at Sony Pictures. So worked on a bunch of the films that they were putting out there, and then got the chance to work on Spider-Man 2, which was really the gateway that opened me up into animation, because after principal photography finished, I was able to weasel my way into the post-production, which was basically all the movie because most of that movie was digital, and just really fell in love with the art and technology aspect of animation. So from there, went full force into focusing on a career in animation. I got an opportunity at Real Effects, was where Bryan and I met. So they had a producer role open up, and I was able to move back to Dallas. That's where I'm from originally. So that was a chance for me to get back to Texas, which I was really happy about, and still get to do what I was wanting to do. And then worked at Real Effects for several years, got a chance to be a producer on The Book of Life, which came out in 2014. And shortly after that movie wrapped, Bryan and I had been talking about joining Brazen for a while, and it was a perfect fit. So the second that movie wrapped, I joined on at Brazen and have been there ever since.
Great.
So just real quick, you all say you both have like live film action experience.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that carries over into animation?
All of it applies. From, if you think about cinematography and the layout artist, for example, which is where I started, and that was part of the reason I got hired originally at Real Effects, was because when they brought me in, they said, "Hey, you have a film degree, so you know camera really well and composition, and you also know Maya," because I'd learned Maya, and they said, "Okay, so you know how to do this," and that was my foot in the door. Even though I wanted to be an animator, I was able to get in to composition similar to the way you would do in live action film. And so there's so many things about it's just filmmaking and storytelling. I mean, it's all the same, right? It's just the tools are different.
Yeah, the very similar fundamentals. I think the biggest difference that I had to adjust to was in live action, you shoot something and then most of the creative crafting happens in editorial. In animation, that process is happening all along the way. Some studio executives take a little bit too much liberty there, and they're wanting to change stuff way too late in the game, but it does give you the flexibility to be finessing the story way later than if you were shooting a live action film.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you break from your storyboards, like further on into production?
That's interesting. Well, and we can talk about this as we continue. We have a very specific process, which we spend a lot of time in storyboards, color scripts. The pre-production and art aspect, we believe that if we can nail that really well and make that look good, it allows us to transfer that even more closely on the back end, which is like, animation, lighting, etc. So our studio, as opposed to other studios, don't typically break from that. Like we don't break that often from what we have established early on in storyboards. Now, if you need to, if there's an issue, or if you have another idea, you obviously can. But we actually try to do all that solving early on because it's way cheaper than solving it on the back end.
Right. And board artists will draw whatever, right? They're not really as focused on actual size and scale of sets and characters. So sometimes, like Bryan was saying, you do have to evolve and find it once you're in layout. But the intent in the storyboards is what we always try and stick to.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So bring it back out. You said you wanted to build stories of meaning and purpose, and that's what your company culture is about.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit more about the big picture of Brazen and what y'all want to do with animation?
Absolutely. So if you sort of look at a lot of content now, I would say, especially over the last 5 years, there's lots of content that's being given to kids, families, that I would say it's not, very uplifting, right? In terms of it may be fluffy and it may be funny, but not particularly meaningful. And so we want to do sort of what we call redemptive sort of storytelling, right? Which is like foundationally the good that happens in the world, the good in people, and so there are just lots of influences right now on our kids and our families, and we would love to kind of tell these more classic types of stories that you might normally see, right? So in the past, but do it with do it in an excellent way with phenomenal art and storytelling. And so when we say meaning and purpose, that's what we mean. Is we mean something different than what you're currently getting with a lot of studios.
Okay, cool. So you're doing that in your personal work, and you also have commercial work to help subsidize that creation, right?
Yeah.
Before we talk about your commercial work, can you give us a little bit about some of your stuff that's in production right now that's your IP?
It's our IP, yep. So we have, of course, we have a feature film, which is called Tempest. And as you might imagine, a film or a film property, we are still a small studio, so a film property takes a long time to develop in writing, art, development. So we're doing that. We have some TV shows in development. We have one show that we've partnered with a 2-time Grammy Award-winning rapper. It's a kids TV show, and it's all hip hop, and it's really cool and really fun. And then we have a video game that actually we're developing, and so I'll talk more about sort of that. So it's less about the medium, and it's more about the types of stories, and so that's what we want to be known for. And as I'll explain as we go on, which is that a lot of our service work is video games, because we've pivoted pretty hard into real time, and so whether we're doing a feature film or a TV show or a video game, as we continue with real time, it will all be in the engine. It will all be in Unreal or Unity or right. And so I'm really excited about that, about how we can tell our stories in this sort of emerging technology.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, when Bryan founded the studio and started bringing people on, we needed to get something out there to announce that Brazen was a studio. So we did a really cool 2D animated piece that stars our mascot character, Iggy, that everybody loved, and it was great. But because it was 2D, it was very apparent very early on that people just assumed that we were a 2D only studio. Which was great. We were getting 2D work. The problem being we had recruited a whole bunch of 3D artists. So that was one of the great things, and actually allowed us to work the Tempest short that we created in early on in the studio. And it really pushed us in a lot of ways that we wouldn't have otherwise been pushed. And we were constantly striving for really high quality, which I think really translates into the final short that we created for Tempest. And when we released that into the world, now all of a sudden we're getting 2D projects, 3D projects, and with the goal always to be able to spend time developing our IP as well.
And that actually is one of the beauties of doing both service and IP, is that if you do a piece of IP and you do get it out in the world in some form, people see that. Even clients see that and they're like, wow, that's really amazing. I love that. Can you do something like that for us? So it has this really interesting, synergy between the two sides, which is the service work helps fund the IP, and then the IP helps actually get you more service
from the people that brought you.
Exactly,
that's
right.
The whole thing. It's all about what you've done. And when we first started, we hadn't done anything. We had a lot of people with a lot of experience that had done all these great things throughout the course of their careers, but it was, what has Brazen done? Well, now we have a big book of work to be able to show that shows off our talent, and our IP properties are starting to gain momentum. So it's been a really fun last 5 years.
Do you feel like when you take on commercial projects, there's somewhat of a limitation because there's less creativity involved with it?
So that's really interesting to say that, because from the very beginning, our backgrounds had been in situations where we were being handed lots of things. Like we were handed boards, we were handed things to just execute. And so when we started the studio, one thing we said is like, we don't want to be an execution studio. We want to truly be a creative studio. And so I would say vast majority of our clients come to us and say, what are your ideas? We want you guys to come up with the idea. We want you guys to board it. We want you guys. So it has allowed it. So most of what you see on our reel or in the work that we do, it's because we came up with it, we boarded it. And so that's been awesome. Fantastic. Yeah.
Do you have, so you say you want to have creative control and you want to also tell stories that are more wholesome.
Yeah.
Have you ever come to problems where you have to either say no to a project or not take clients because they don't fit your values?
All the time.
Yeah,
all the
that
time.
happens all the time.
So we had, I won't mention what the property was, but it was basically they come to us and they said it was 20-minute episodes in Unreal, huge brand, huge property, but it was like gratuitous. I mean, there's like chopping off heads and dropping F-bombs everywhere. I mean, it was just like, it was like, look, some studios will be totally cool doing all that, but for us, it's like, man, that's just not who we want to be. And I have a 11-year-old and a 7-year-old, and Greg has kids as well, and it's one of those things where it's like, if we're gonna do something, like, let's do something that we're proud to show our kids, and so
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. So your company's recently expanded, right? In pivoting to Unreal or whatever programs you're using to do real-time stuff, you're hiring more people.
Yep.
Can you talk about some of the strains and then some of the benefits of expanding your company out from a smaller studio?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We spent most of the ride from Dallas talking about some of the strains, because Brazen is, we've been blessed to have really great clients, and a lot of every year we're increasing our sales, which that's a lot of what I do is I'm outside trying to convince people basically to give us projects. So back to when we first started, it was a really difficult proposition. Now we're getting opportunities all the time. So it's really figuring out how to fit it all in and make sure that if we do take on a project, we can do a superior job on it. So it's anytime you have a growth phase of a company, there's going to be strain that comes from it. And, we definitely are growing. But like Bryan mentioned earlier, we've been through some pretty big growth phases before. So we know some good things and some bad things that can come from that. So we're always looking out for pitfalls, but it's inevitable that as you're trying to grow a company, that's going to happen.
Yeah. But I mean, even down to like our workspace, right? We literally have some of our offices, we're having to jam like 4, 5, even 6 people in one case. The floor is full. The rooms are full. Now, luckily in April, so we have a new building that we're building, and we'll be able to have lots more people in room, and that was the goal, right? We could feel the growth coming, and so we made a strategic decision to try to go, let's get more space, and so that's exciting.
And we're dealing with a very subjective medium, so we could create something and think it's great and show it to our client and it not be exactly what they had in mind. So there's constantly a brokering process to say, okay, you want this, here's how much time and budget we have to be able to do this, let's figure out the best plan of action. So it's a lot of relationship management, and our production team does a great job of making sure that everything stays on track, and as it controls the chaos as much as possible.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll just add is that, from the standpoint of an owner of a company, the last thing I want is to have to grow so fast and then we have a bunch of layoffs. That's unfortunately, there's some studios that get zealous, you might say, and they go, oh, we're gonna grow as fast as we can. Our growth has been, we're self-funded. We've never taken an investor, and so our growth has been all organic. And so that's allowed us to be smart about, okay, we're growing because we need to grow, not just because we want to grow because we got some big chunk of investment. And that we want to be smart. We want to learn from what other people, other mistakes people have made. And so we talk about it constantly. Like, we're hiring because we need these positions, not because we just want to grow for the sake of growing. Right?
The industry, unfortunately, is relatively nomadic by nature, just because a lot of studios we're going to hire 300 people for this project, and when the project's over, your contract's up and you need to go find another job. We really want to build a studio that has a core group that can grow with us, and which is easier said than done. But like Bryan was saying, we're definitely very particular about the people that we bring in. So we take a long time to go through the interview process because we want to make sure that people are the right fit for the studio and our culture. And we don't want to just hire people frivolously. We want to make sure that it's very strategic in the way that we approach.
Okay. So between you and probably Real Effects, you're some of the bigger animation presences in Dallas. How do you feel about Dallas as a creative hub rather than a business hub for animation and film?
That's a great question. So I think our hope is that there's been sort of a legacy of studios. If you know about the history of animation in Dallas, DNA Productions, which did Jimmy Neutron and Ant Bully, and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so they were based in Irving, and they got really, I think there were 600 people at one point, and they ended up shutting the studio down. Not, to be honest, I know more about the history of sort of the area. They didn't have to shut down, but they decided to. And in fact, when Greg and I were at Real Effects, I think we absorbed like half that studio.
Yeah, it was really interesting because that was right when I got to Real Effects, and Real Effects was growing and DNA had just shut down. So a lot of people from DNA came over to Real Effects. So that actually worked out to be really good timing.
Yeah.
And with DNA gone, Real Effects was the only game in town for a long time. I mean, there were some smaller studios, but Real Effects got up to be about 750 people. And now they've made the decision to shift most of the production up to Montreal. So there isn't as much presence there as there was before. So, we've actually been able to bring over some people from there that we like, but there's also been the opportunity to bring people from Singapore and California and New York. And, there's a really strong craving out there for people who want to find a studio that they can call home for a long term as opposed to just a particular project. So we're definitely a little bit unique in that. And Texas is a great place to raise a family. So a lot of people are tired of living in San Francisco and paying $20,000 a month in rent, and want to get a house with a yard, and Texas definitely provides a little bit of that. So it's been fun to watch people be interested in relocating and joining us.
Yeah, I think that and as we continue to talk, you'll see sort of the theme of my thought pattern, which is I do believe when people think about animation studios, I call it the more traditional. Our name is Brazen Animation. Of course, we've got kind of a lineage of that sort of that DNA in real effects, and right. So there's some of that in there. But remember, there's a lot of game studios around Dallas as well, and I think because of real time, what's going to start to happen, both animation studios and game studios, it's going to become harder and harder to tell the difference, right? Because just naturally with that medium and that technology, it's going to allow for these different types of storytelling modes to happen, right? And so that's why I think what will happen is rather than call a studio that's an animation studio or that's a game studio, I think it's going to become, I don't know what they'll call it, but it'll be something else, right? And you'll start to blend the two. And so we've made the strategic decision to, even though we're known mostly for animation, we pivoted really hard into, let's do animation in real time.
So just covering that a little bit more, I know you've worked with Epic a lot on their shorts for Fortnite and then some of their other stuff. Unreal Engine is the big name in the industry right now. Yep. There was recently an article where they talked about how they used Unreal at LucasArts on the Mandalorian project. Yep. Which was just insane. It was crazy. But do you think that Unreal Engine is going to be like the program to stay for real-time rendering, or do you think something else is coming up? What are your professional insights on that?
Yeah, I think Epic, and obviously we have a relationship with them, so we kind of know a lot about what they're doing as well. And they are going hard internal investment into what they're doing with Unreal, specifically in the sort of filmmaking space. Yeah. Now Unity, of course, is trying to catch up, but Unity has spent a little bit more time more in the game areas and especially mobile. So I think both of them are going to continue to compete, but I think Unreal, Tim Sweeney, the CEO, he's made such a huge dedicated amount of investment into the development of all those tools and kind of like film tools for Unreal and things like that. I think they're going to be hard to beat because I think they're going to try to put themselves so far ahead that it'll be hard to catch up.
Yeah, it's a interesting coincidence that Fortnite has blown up to the level and is producing the amount of revenue that Fortnite is. That allows them to reinvest in Unreal, which is really Epic's baby. Like, that is the basis of that company. Fortnite is a great success, but Unreal will carry forward for a long time. And from a look perspective, Unreal can push the quality of the image far better than anything else. Unity has its merits, don't get me wrong, but Unreal from a look perspective is really great.
So how much do y'all use photogrammetry in your productions?
I mean, a little bit. We as needed. I would say we, if you look at the overall style though of the type of work that we do, it's relatively cartoony and stylized. So we typically lean much more heavily on the art that we produce than anything else, I would say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are certain projects that call for it, but most of our stuff is much more stylized, so you can't get away with as much a photo integration. But we whatever the project needs, we'll definitely use whatever tools are available to do it in the best and most efficient way possible. Yeah.
So our club and then our program is very student focused. So what should students be learning right now? What specific tools or programs should they be really honing in on if they need to keep up with the pace to get hired and whenever they graduate? I
think that's great. Now, obviously, to answer that question, some of it depends on what the student's focus needs to be. Right. But I'll say this, and when I go speak to any school, especially when I'm speaking to professors or those that are running programs, what I tell them is I say it is extremely important that you give students, depending on what they want to do, two things. a really, really strong artistic, like life drawing, figure drawing, a really strong artistic foundation. And then on the technology side, an extremely strong programming, computer science foundation. What I've learned over the years, right, of hiring people, managing people, people who have those two things as a strong foundation, whatever direction they decide to go, whether it be more artistic or more tech-based, if they have extremely great drawing skills or great programming skills, they tend to excel faster than other people in their respective discipline. And so, especially in terms of in light of this of Unreal and real time, I think especially if you're on the tech side, like having programming is really, really important. Yeah.
I would just say the initial inclination as a student is to say, I want to go work at a big studio. And that's great. I mean, I learned so much in my big studio experience, but it's not for everybody. And if you do go to a big studio, you're going to be a very specific part of a production. If you go to a smaller studio, then you get an opportunity to have your fingerprints on a lot more stuff. So it really is about self-actualization and determining what you want as opposed to just chasing the lure of the big studio, because there are great perks that come with that, but it's also about what it is as an artist you want to be, or as a production manager, or whatever you aspire to be, where is the best fit for that? And then the other thing, we get how many applications every day? Thousands. And we don't have a dedicated recruiter, so it really falls on a lot of us to go through the applications. So persistence is huge. It's just submitting once and crossing your fingers is probably not going to get the desired result, just because there's so many people who are trying to break into the industry. So persistence and figuring out ways to differentiate and writing a personalized message as opposed to just copying, pasting, and just figuring out ways to really make yourself stick out, to make a potential employer say, oh, I really want to talk to that person, find out more about them.
I mean, just to show you, when I was animation director at Real Effects, there was an animator that we eventually hired, but this is not exaggeration. For a year and a half, he submitted his reel, and he was updating the reel. It wasn't the same reel. Updating his reel once a month. Submitted it once a month for a year and a half until we hired him.
Well, it's even like your story. You started off and you just kept coming back until they said you're going to be. You started in layout, and then sometimes you're not going to get your dream job first off. You have to have a mindset of, I'm going to get my foot in the door and I'm going to show them how great I am, and then I'm going to go where I go from there.
Yeah.
All right. So kind of on a smaller scale, in like the day-to-day work of your productions, how do you organize your pipeline? How do you structure your dailies and work like in a team to produce projects on time?
It's good. You want to go there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're unique in that we do something twice a day called Deskies, where anyone who wants to attend can go around and we talk about all the different projects that are going on. There's a creative director responsible for each project that gives the ultimate feedback, but Bryan, if he's leading a show, will give his feedback, take input from the team, and it happens twice a day. So you're getting constant feedback wherever the shot's at or wherever the asset's at. So there's the ability to iterate really quickly and collaborate. A lot of studios have very compartmentalized departments, so modeling will never interact with animation. Well, and we don't believe that to be necessarily the right way for it to work. You need to be thinking about other departments around yours and how your model that you're building will affect things down the line. And so we spend a lot of time together as a group, making sure that the work level stays strong and that we're constantly meeting to talk about what's the plan, and okay, this changed, what's the plan now? So we're recalibrating all the time.
And so on that, I just want to mention, when it's interesting because students tend to do well when they come to Brazen because they're used to, a lot of schools, they're used to a collaborative environment, right? As students are used to working together in the lab and things like that. When you go to a studio, most big studios, as Greg said, there are these silos, and I call it pitching over the wall. And what happens is it's almost becomes cultural in most companies where they actually don't want the departments talking to each other, because it's unfortunate, because a lot of times what happens is they end up wanting to run things through a supervisor, some person above, and so they don't want the artist talking. They want information running above so that it can happen at a higher level. And as Greg said, like that is my pet peeve. Like I actually hate it. And I believe, so one of our core values is collaboration. So we have 7 core values, and collaboration is really important for us because it does several things. It helps the communication. It helps push the quality so that every time someone's given feedback, so let's say an animator is giving feedback on a model, or a lighter is giving feedback on a color script, or whatever it is, someone's going to see something to make it better. And how you keep it from just getting completely out of control is you have a creative director that's in charge, that has a vision for the project and can kind of make the final say. So even if an artist has a suggestion, the director may go, "Oh, that's amazing, let's add it." Or they say, "You know what? Doesn't quite fit my vision. It's pretty cool, but I don't think it'll work here." And then you move on. The other benefit of that is the fact that you can grow leaders that way. Because if you can imagine, if you're in a super huge studio that you don't get exposed to any other department, then what that means is that you become very, very focused on your one thing that you do, and you don't actually understand how the rest of the project or how the rest of the studio works. Whereas if you have lots of collaboration, regardless of what department you work in, you're being exposed to everything, which means if you have a bigger picture view, you become a better leader. So it actually allows you to grow into those leadership roles, and that's what we want. We want that ultimately for our studio.
Great. So in our school, there's a big two-sided argument between being a specialist and being a generalist.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of the big studios that everyone dreams of when they're a kid going to are like, we want you to model, and you will only model.
Mm-hmm.
But other studios, smaller studios like yours, probably have a more generalist approach. When you're hiring someone, how much do you look for generalization in their work? And how much do you think that maybe specialization can help or hurt somebody?
Mm-hmm. So I would say for us, it's actually neither. For us, it's actually some people call it the T method. I call it having a major and a couple of minors. And so I don't actually want a generalist. Because what comes with it, a true generalist is the whole thing of jack of all trades, master of none, and it's difficult. It is difficult to be good at everything. It's just hard, right? And vice versa. People that we have. Let's say you go to a big studio, and you have become really specialized. It now becomes extremely, and let's say you've been there for years. It becomes really, really difficult to go work at any other size studio. And think about how many big studios there are in the world. There's like 5 or 6, right? So now what you've done is because you pigeonholed yourself in being so specialized, your job opportunities are really limited, right? And so what we want to do is we hire people. What we say is we want someone that's they're phenomenal in one thing, like great, and then they're pretty good at a couple other things. And what that allows for is that they can come into Brazen and they can push the quality, because that's a part of, we want to really continue to push the quality of what we can do as a studio. Each year we want to push the bar up. So if someone comes in and they're great at one thing, then that allows us to do that. But then they can, because they're small, people can slide around and help each other a little bit, right? So, for example, let's say we have someone who is an animator, but they can also character design. So their major is animation, but character design is their minor, let's say. Well, then they're able to kind of do what they do animation really well, and then they can help us out on the design if needed. So it's like that. And then we look for people like that have something they're phenomenal at, and then they've got a couple other things they're pretty good at. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you have a lot of work that's both 2D and 3D. What are some of the challenges and benefits of having both a 3D and a 2D studio merged into one?
I mean, for me, I love working in both. And if we can find a project that allows us to incorporate 2D and 3D together, even better. I think the look is so cool and unique, and 2D animation is a beautiful art form. It's evolved. Obviously, we're not doing it on cells anymore, but just the raw nature of being able to draw and craft something out of nothing, I think is so wonderful. And then 3D animation throws in a whole nother level of technical pipeline specifications that you need to loop in. So I don't know of a huge amount of studios that do both to a high level. So I like it because it's a unique calling card for Brazen. And for me personally, I love the diversity and not every project looking exactly the same. We feel like storytelling should drive what the look of a project is, and just saying, well, it's 2D because we're a 2D studio isn't necessarily doing a project justice. So being able to evaluate the creative and say this is the best way to visually tell this story is a great tool for us.
Yeah. And so, one thing I didn't mention is my background. I was trained by an animator called Ken. His name is Ken Duncan, and he was a 20-year Disney veteran, and he oversaw most of the female characters in the that kind of the 90s 2D anime movies. So he was in charge of Meg and Hercules. He was in charge of he worked on the Belle team in Beauty and the Beast, and so he was sort of my animation mentor. He trained me, and that really did help me, as a young animator, develop my sensibilities. And so 2D, I think, was always going to be a huge part of Brazen from the beginning, because it actually it's the sensibilities that I have anyway. Even if we're doing CG animation, we want it to be very cartoony and pushed and squash and stretch and all those things. And so it's actually natural to both do 2D and 3D, because even in our 3D work, we're going to integrate some level of 2D anyway, in just the way that we animate. So to take both those methods and put them together is actually just it's fun. It's phenomenal. It gives it a really, as Greg said, it gives it a really unique look and feel. I don't particularly prefer really stiff CG animation. I like really fun, dynamic, pushed animation. I mean, I believe if you're doing animation, you're telling story in animation, then it should be slightly exaggerated anyway, right?
Yeah, and from a workflow perspective, we use 2D even in CG projects. In the beginning of a shot, we'll actually pencil test it before we go into CG animation to work out the motion of the shot. You could iterate a lot faster and solve the shot basically in the performance before you spend a lot of time doing the clunky 3D animation. So that's been a really efficient way for us to work, and it helps us get to a high level of quality even if we don't have as much time as we'd like on a particular shot.
Mm-hmm. So you're like, after animatics, you're doing pencil tests? And
correct.
Yeah. The layout?
Yeah. Wow. So we do lots of pencil tests that we're able to actually hand off to the animation team afterward, so that if a director's looking at it, the director has basically already approved the shot in 2D, and now can be executed in 3D, and the animator's like, I know exactly what to do, right?
If you're doing like more complex camera work and layout, is it possible to do pencil tests that'll like mimic what the final 3D image will be?
Yes. In fact, sometimes what we'll do is we'll do a really complex shot and layout, and then kick it back and do pencil tests on top of the CG camera, so that we've got the camera move. Now we have the character animation to follow as well.
Yeah, and having animators that can do both 2D and 3D helps in down the line as well. So if an animator is not necessarily getting the pose exactly right, drawovers are super helpful. So just having the ability to draw makes an animator even more effective. Mm-hmm. So even if they can't necessarily 2D animate, like we talked about earlier, maybe they're a good character designer, so they understand how to make a character pose really appealing and help an animator get a shot that maybe is giving him a hard time.
Yeah. And so as you would imagine, the animators that we hire, sometimes they come in and they're actually better at 2D and maybe not as good at 3D. Sometimes they come in and they're it's vice versa, right? So what we try to do is, regardless of whether they come in as mostly a 2D animator or a 3D animator, we try to put them together, get the collaboration to help them put them together to learn and grow in their respective areas, right? So that someone who's good at 2D can help teach someone else 2D. Someone who's good at 3D can actually help the 2D animator grow in 3D. So so we, trying to find someone who's great at both is kind of like finding a unicorn.
Yeah.
Right. So we actually we try to allow for the way that we grow as a studio. we want to do both of those, but we have people who are better.
Yeah, and we want to hire people who want to learn. Like, even if someone doesn't know how to 2D animate and they're a great 3D animator, but they have the desire, we would be happy to bring them on the team and help them learn 2D, but they have to have that drive and that passion for animation.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So expanding into more real-time projects, how has that affected your pipeline and like adjusted your workflow?
A ton. So as you would imagine, things like building character rigs, right? Because you're not using blend shapes and correctives and things that you might normally use in a pre-rendered pipeline. So it's caused us we've had to build our own tools, our own character rigging process now that's all joint based. But it allows us to, so we're working on I can't tell you what it is, working on a really cool big property right now, very cartoony, in Unreal. And we're able to do lots of really fun stuff by squash and stretch and really pushing the rigs, but in real time. And so, so that's a huge part of, again, it makes sense, right? With our style and the things we typically want to do. If we're going to do that in real time, let's do it in real time. And so it's caused us to write tools, new processes. Of course, as you would imagine, lighting, like we've had to write our own tools for lighting in Unreal as well. So it's been really great. It's everybody's excited.
Totally excited. And it doesn't happen overnight. So we still have a pre-rendered pipeline that is still in existence and still gets utilized. But at the same time, we're building up the real-time pipeline and continuing to make that more and more robust. So eventually it will be anything we could do pre-rendered, we can do in real time. It's not quite there yet, but it's definitely the goal is to shift completely to real time.
But I mean, for example, just the epic stuff that we've done, on Fortnite, part of the reason why they hired us is because they said, hey, you guys have this, of course you have a lot of people that worked in film and in animated films and things like that. And we love your work, we love your animation, and we would love for you guys to help us push what we can accomplish in Unreal. And so, to have the actual maker of the engine come to you and say that is really, really cool. So that's great.
So how much interaction is there between you and Epic as a company to say like, oh, we want this tool, can you add it in your next update?
Yeah, we have certain builds from them, obviously, and so we're talking to them constantly about, man, we'd love to have this. And now sometimes they'll kind of put it on you like, well, why don't you guys build it, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's definitely there are we're working with them on another project now and talking about the workflow and the process and things like that. And so, you have to realize obviously that the Epic Unreal team, they have their production part, that they're making the shorts and things like that, but their software team, they kind of put them off by themselves.
Yeah, and Tim still sits with them and right. Actually codes. It's pretty wild to see him still in there. But for as huge as Epic has become, and they're still, the cadence of the Fortnite releases is so rapid.
It's crazy.
That it's really hard for them to take a beat and like solve stuff. So a lot of times they're band-aiding and trying just to make things work as any way they can. So it's nice to come in with an outside perspective and say, oh, have you thought about writing a tool for this? Or have you, and they really value kind of the outsider looking in perspective, because we can help them maybe do some stuff that they either haven't been able to get to or just haven't thought of.
Yeah. And by the way, not to get on a tangent about the types of clients that we work with, but what we found is, video game clients, because we work with Epic and Riot and, these different big studios, and they're very, very, again, collaborative. There's that word again. And that's part of the reason why I think we like working with them. They like working with us, is because it's very fluid. There are some client relationships that honestly, that are very, can be difficult.
They're
challenging. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but man, that by and large, most game studios that we work with, they're phenomenal to work with. Yeah.
So one of the big things we have as like a third of our, like, we section it off into games, animation, and then interactive design. So with real-time technology that like implements the ability to do stuff that's more live and interactive, have y'all, have y'all like brainstormed any projects that may utilize more real-time stuff, like Jim Henson's like digital puppets? Or
Yeah. We actually, so we don't have a project currently with that. However, we've utilized real-time technology in different ways. So, for example, on Tempest, we hooked up a makeshift. Even though that short is not in real time,
Right.
we were able to capture the camera data,
Yeah.
right, and use the camera so that we could get more of a naturalistic feel and things like that. And so, we haven't gone that direction quite yet with a full show that way, but we've used aspects of that.
Yeah, we've created some augmented reality experiences that are in-engine.
Yeah.
One of our IP properties, we actually have an AR component to it as well, that will be interactive, where you can tap characters and certain actions will play out. So it's always a consideration. I think Bryan mentioned this before, is, we're not necessarily just in it to create a TV show or to create a feature film. We want our properties to have multiple spokes and be able to not just be one thing. It could live in a lot of different spaces. So the future is definitely leading itself towards interactive storytelling, and we want to be a part of that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, as you obviously know, this notion of narrative video games, that as the quality improves, video games will feel more like film. And then you've got films that are done in real time that will be interactive like game. And so, and anything in between, right? And so that's why it just really is an exciting time, because I think if people just realize, just think about the history of animation in general, when you having 2D, of course, with Disney and Pixar CG, and then now this weird thing that's happened where video game technology and animation have now started to merge to become this new thing. It's really, really cool. It's kind of like this new third or fourth wave, if you want to call it, of a medium.
So do you think that as technology gets cheaper, the democratization of technology is improving the industry, or it's creating too many things and maybe hurting the industry?
That's a great question.
We were actually talking about it earlier. It's like the amount of open positions right now at studios. I've never seen so many people recruiting simultaneously, and that is because there is such a desire for content, whether it be the streaming services or video game companies are creating tons of content. There's just tons of stuff being produced, which is great. I think the problem that leads itself to is how do you make noise through the crowd, right? How does your content get out there and get seen? And unfortunately, because there is so much stuff being produced, it's kind of a race to the bottom in some cases. So that leads to more stuff that's just kind of, it may look good, it may be funny, but it's not necessarily meaningful in any kind of way. So that's, for us, further justifying the mission of Brazen to be able to get more stuff out there that can impact people's lives in a positive way.
Yeah, especially in light of the fact that, because just like a lot of things, think about what the period that we're in right now, especially like streaming animation.
Right.
It's similar to what happened when the iPhone came out, and you end up with a lot of apps, right? So what happened early is there was sort of a rush. Everybody wanted to do an app, and it takes a while for the market to sort of like find equilibrium, right? Because not every app is going to succeed. Not every, right? And so I think that's what's going to happen also with these streaming services and all the content that's being produced for them. Is I think right now it's a flood of it,
Like a bubble.
a little bit, yeah. And I think it'll, I don't know if it'll pop, but it at the very least it will kind of settle into like, okay, what's the right amount of content that the market can bear, right?
Yeah, and it's like VR. So when everybody was like, oh, VR is the next big thing, and people were doing VR experiences of like looking around a kitchen. And it's like, why would you spend time doing something that you could do in real life? And now people are starting to make some more interactive experiences, experimenting with storytelling in VR. So mediums just need a little bit of time to mature. And because of all the new technology, I think people are still trying to figure out how powerful it can be, which is really exciting. And I think if used for the right ways, could be very, very powerful for the future.
Yeah.
So, in your company, how are you promoting like new creative voices with like diversity and inclusion?
That's good. Well, so one of our properties is a strong female lead character, and so we definitely try to push characters, stories that have strong females or minorities as characters in the stories themselves. So, for example, in our kids' property that's all rap, right? That takes place in the inner city. As you'd imagine, it's very hip hop, very urban. So the voices in that show are all minorities, right? And so I, it's interesting because I think for us it's less about trying to force that, and it's more about what is just a good story to tell. Just so happens it needs to be a female lead or an urban setting, or does it make sense what I'm saying? Yeah. So
and then from a promotion standpoint, we allow people a lot of opportunities to step up and take initiative.
Mm-hmm.
So that to us is really what drives how quickly people advance in the company is not just doing the thing that they're necessarily hired for, but figuring out where there are needs in other areas and where they can improve their skill set, and just, people who are constantly looking to sharpen their skills and learn and grow typically do very well at Brazen because there's lots of opportunity. We want people that have been with us to get promoted. But we're also not just going to give it to someone just because they've been with us for a long time. It's a very merit-based, you're doing an amazing job. You need to take the next step.
Well, that's awesome. All right, so just as kind of an ending question, what do you want the future of Brazen to be?
I think in a nutshell, because people have asked me this, before in terms of how do you define success for Brazen? And I don't define success as us being a huge studio necessarily. I mean, we might be. I don't define success in terms of the revenue. Success for Brazen is when we're telling our stories and we can literally see the influence it has on culture and society. If we can do that, if we can actually influence culture in a positive way and literally see a shift, that's when I know that we've succeeded.
Yeah, that's what he said. I mean, that's it. That's a very lofty goal, obviously, but I don't think that we would be putting as much into this studio as we are if we didn't have lofty goals. We love to work with the clients that are our work for hire projects, and we will always continue to do that. But at the same time, we always are going to have the drive to be creating our own properties and getting those out there and making sure that we're not only pushing storytelling, but also pushing technology. Because a lot of studios get into a very creative mindset, which is fantastic, but technology is such a big part of what we do. If you ignore that, then you're going to get left behind. So we're constantly focused on building technology as we build the story and art and all the things that make a good project.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, so just to kind of end it off, something completely unrelated to animation. Just give one piece of advice. You can take a second if you need to. One piece of advice for a student that's currently, learning, trying to improve their stuff, but not directly related to animation, generally.
So it can't be related. It can't be related to animation.
No animation.
Wow.
Y'all can take a second. Okay.
That's hard. Well, I'm trying to think what I would tell my kids.
Yeah.
Pick up your room.
Yeah, you can say that.
No. I mean, I actually. So that's a great. So one of our core values at Brazen is grit, perseverance, and one of the things that and hopefully I'm not giving away an interview question here, but if someone applies, but we like to ask questions like, tell me a time when you had to show grit and perseverance. And what's hard is if someone says, well, I had to stay up late one night to study for a test, right? That's not showing a lot of grit. And so that notion of if things get hard, you don't give up. If you encounter obstacles, you don't give up. If you don't know what to do, you don't give up, right? I haven't told you about my life story, but at the core, I believe people who do well in life, they don't give up. And so at the end of the day, if someone can be so passionate, goal-driven, and just decide that they're going to accomplish their dream, they will.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I would just say, obviously, a lot of students are learning a specific thing, but find ways to learn other stuff that you enjoy, whatever that might be. Sometimes you don't necessarily major in the thing that you love to do, but don't allow yourself to become stagnant and quit growing and quit learning anytime in life, but particularly when you're young and you have free time. I wish I would have valued the free time I had in college, because once kids show up, it goes away completely. But, just find ways to enrich your life in a way that makes you happy. And you can grow as a person and still do what you love, and just find ways to do that.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. It was great talking with you, and we'll talk more at our actual meeting.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it. Thank you.